All right, here we are. This is week 3 of 26 of me trying to deal 50 plus hours a week. And if you don't know me, my name is Marc. I'm known on YouTube as Truepokerdealer. I've been helping teach people to be poker dealers through YouTube and other means since 2012. And I've been working in the casino industry since 2007. And here I am today at my new time, Sundays, in the morning-ish, depending on where you are, I guess. I'm in Central Time, so it's still morning for me, and I've got a lot to talk about this week, and as you can see, I've been talking to somebody who's going to help me out, and we're going to help him out too. This right here is I Host Poker. So one of the challenges with learning how to deal poker, through True Poker Dealer is you don't have any simple way to just go and get practice. Well, the owner of I Host Poker Professional Casino Parties reached out to me and basically said, look, by the way, this is one of the owners of Texas Card House also. So this is somebody that came in contact with me because I do work at Texas Card House. And he basically said that for his casino events, he hires dealers who are good with their mechanics and get the idea, but they don't have to be casino ready. And so it's a great opportunity for somebody who's learning to deal to make a little bit of money. You make, he said $90 for 3 hours, which is great, right? You make a little bit of money and you gain experience in the box, which is really valuable to anybody who is a student, especially if they're learning through True Poker Dealer. So, I'm just gonna leave this up and y'all can ask questions, and I'm gonna say here, ask me about I Host Poker if you want to. My ex-girlfriend says this is a pet peeve when I type and read. If you want to get some experience in the box. So they have events that come up periodically, and I'm just going to leave this up during the stream, and you can see behind me, this is a picture I took from their website. This is what it looks like. But I'm going to be talking mostly about week 3. There's been a lot of fun stuff to talk about from this week. So many different nuances, and the more time that I spend in the same poker room, Texas Card House in Dallas, day after day after day, hour after hour after hour, the more familiar I get with the regulars, the more sort of connected I get to the room. I've dealt poker for years, but coming and going in a poker room does have this little bit of a disconnected feel. Now that I'm there for hours and hours and hours every single day, just about is what it feels like. I'm really connected to this room. And for anybody who's wondering, I had spoken about at the end of the last live stream, I talked about how I was only scheduled this past week for 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And in that time, I was considering picking up Wednesday and doing my normal, 5 days, trying to do 11 hours. I know that I say 50 plus hours a week, but I do try to get above that anytime that I can. And I did only work 4 days. I challenged myself to work 4 very long days in order to get to that number. And here's the result. Last week, I did 53 hours and 34 minutes over the course of 4 days. Monday was 9 a.m. until a little bit after 10 p.m. Tuesday was 8 a.m. until almost 10 p.m. Thursday was 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. I promised someone I'd give them a ride home, otherwise I would have kept going that day. And then Friday was 10 a.m. until about 12:30 in the morning. And I'm going to talk about my experience with that. I'm going to talk about some of the interesting stuff that came up. There's just a lot of stuff to go over. Okay, so and as always, please do ask your questions throughout the session. And again, if you're wondering what I Host Poker is, this is somebody who reached out to me and said this is a great opportunity for people who are still learning to be poker dealers but have decent mechanics and get the flow of the game. And they do still audition people. You can't just show up and deal there. But this is a great opportunity for anybody that can make it to the Houston area. The next event is November 11th. And all right, here's my week 3. So, this one comes up a lot for me, and this is a little bit vulnerable to talk about. You don't usually hear people talk about this that are poker dealers, but it's one of those things that you got to ask yourself, what happens if, okay? So I got to work, and it was a morning shift, and it was like 9 in the morning, and the floor gave me an assignment. Now, I sort of fought through traffic to get there on Monday at 9 a.m. And Dallas traffic at 8:30 to 9 is not super fun. And I live like 20 something minutes away without traffic, right? So, it hits you in the face a little bit. So, like I had my coffee, I had my breakfast, I got myself ready to go out the door, and then I just zoomed right to the poker room to the best of my ability. I got there about 5 minutes before I needed to. And once I got there, I had to use the restroom, right? I sort of had to use the restroom in the car. And this is something that happens for poker dealers. Like, you get in and you get sent to a table, and then you're stuck dealing table after table after table once you're in and working. And like, what do you do if you have to use the restroom? And so I got super lucky, but I do still want to talk about what I would have had to do and how to handle it if you have to use the restroom when you're going to a table. So here's what happened for me. I got in, I got my assignment. They told me to go to table 6. So I walk over to go to table 6. When I get there, I'm thinking I can make it, and then it hits me. And the dealer that's there is looking at me, and he's saying like, "Are you going home?" Talking to the dealer at a different table. And he's confused, and I'm confused. And anytime that happens, just so you know, sometimes in the mix of things, supervisors do send dealers to the wrong table. Okay, so I had two things going on in my head. Number one, I don't think I'm going to make it through this 30-minute table without like having to get tapped out. And that is one of the answers, by the way. If you ever have to get tapped out to use the restroom, just call the floor over. It's a little bit embarrassing, but just be human, and it's totally fine. And, people might be like, "Oh, that's a little bit funny or awkward," but you know what? They forget about it really quickly, and just make sure that you like are cool about it and wash your hands and all that stuff if you go use the restroom. But you can also like call the supervisor over to just quietly tell them like, "Hey, I really have to use the restroom." But in this case, the dealer was being a little bit weird is all I can say. So I went back over to the supervisor, and I sort of said, "Okay, so are you sure I'm going to 6? Because something seems confused over here." And then he realized that the dealer on 6 was the one that was going home, and table 6 was actually the break table. So I started on break, and I got pretty lucky that I got to start on break. And somebody mentioned to me that I've never been to the other casinos in this area. Some of them are across the border in Oklahoma, but they mentioned to me that when they worked at WinStar as a supervisor, all the dealers used to want to start on break, I guess because their commute, and they just wanted to like chill a little bit after they got there, which to me just says you can start on break anytime you want as a dealer. And this is me talking to myself too. If you literally just show up early, then you get a break when you get there, and there's nothing you have to worry about. But okay, so I got lucky. I got to start on break. I got to handle my business, and I avoided the situation of saying, because what I would have had to do in that case is, instead of tapping into the table, I just knew I would have had to tell the dealer, "Hold on," gone and tell the supervisor what was going on for me. Maybe I got marked late, maybe not, I don't know, if that would have happened. And then I would have just had to do what I had to do. And one thing about working at a small card room that was designed the way that Texas Card House was designed, which is fine. It's a little bit weird because you share the restroom with the customers. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I also understand that it's not a huge deal either. So that was my very first thing that happened to me in my very first moment in my very first shift of the week. And once I got that out of the way, there was a lot of smooth sailing from then on. But yeah, that is a rough situation when you go to a table and you got to use a restroom, and it is completely understood and acceptable that if that happens, you just ask to get tapped out, and it sort of is what it is, and it's fine. So let's see. So another thing that happened this week that I thought was really interesting, I talked to a dealer in the break room who worked 90 hours the week before and 91 hours the week before that. And we had a long conversation. Because of the experiment that I'm doing, and this week, on those 4 days, I was working like 12 to 14 hours per day. because of this experiment, dealers noticed that I was there for a long time. And I talked about this a little bit last week. Well, this week, instead of saying that I'm inspiring them to work more, they were asking me how the hell I do it. And there happened to be a dealer in the break room while we were talking about that who was notorious for doing this. And what he does is he works 3 weeks on and 3 weeks at another job where he owns a business, and then he flip-flops back and forth. And so this dealer was showing me like 90 to 91 hours, and we were sort of comparing notes in front of the rest of the break room. There were about 7 dealers in there total. And we were talking about how to make a 12 to 14 hour shift completely doable. And we were exactly on the same page. Now, mind you, I haven't been doing this for that long. Okay, this is only my 3rd week of this. He's been doing this 7 days a week, like 12 to 13 hours a day, for 3-week stretches for a while. Okay, number one, both of us agreed that if you don't need the money, it is much more mentally easy to do this, okay? So in my case, I don't have a life set up where I need this money. And yeah, I do need some of it, like, don't get me wrong, but I don't need 55 hours a week. That's a lot. And me going through this experiment and figuring out what this is like is valuable to me, but it's not 100% because I need the money. I'm not stuck in this lifestyle. I don't have to do this year after year after year where I'm working crazy hours as a poker dealer all the time. So number one, not being stuck in that lifestyle and that mentality where you need that much money is incredibly powerful for taking on something like this. Lil Venice says a lot of dealers working a ton of hours at TCH. It's true, and there's also a lot of dealers that get the benefit of getting to leave without working full shifts. I think there's maybe 2 days a week where you get stuck at Texas Card House right now in Dallas. And there's a lot of days a week where you pretty much get the option. That's one of the huge benefits of having so many tables is you have a lot of dealers there, and then it sort of works itself out where the people that want to go can go and the people that want to stay can stay. If you don't have as many active tables going in a poker room, you sort of have to dictate it yourself as management. You don't really allow the dealers to choose what they want because you don't have the luxury of that flexibility. So, you know, we were talking through this and comparing notes, like I said, and we were on the same page about a few things. Number one, sleep. Okay, making sure that you are on a clear, clean schedule where you're sleeping. Like for me, I used to tell myself, and I sort of made this up. I used to tell myself 6 hours a night was what I needed in my life, period. And then I became an entrepreneur and it went down to 2 hours, and I also became a dad and it went down to like 2 hours. But nowadays I'm like 7 minimum is really what I want. And if I don't get it because maybe I wake up or something like that, I force myself to stay in bed and sort of like at least stay relaxed. And I've noticed there have been 1 or 2 days in this stretch of 3 weeks where I have not slept the full amount or more, and it's been a tough day where I've had to like go to my car and take little mini naps. And it's also the quality of sleep. Like, you know, I talk about this a lot, but or periodically rather. There's a person, Matthew Walker, who wrote us a book about sleep, and it's a really informative book, sort of a slow, complicated read. I enjoyed it. I'm not saying everyone will, but the bottom line from it, he also does a podcast, Matthew Walker, with Joe Rogan. I mentioned this before. It's really worth watching. People don't exactly understand the value of sleep, and so here's the little thing that I'll say is I've learned to try to get my REM sleep. It makes everything a lot easier, and the fatigue is a lot easier too. So sleep is really important there. Also, I didn't ask this other dealer who works 90 hours a week this question, but I imagine that this is true based on the bits and pieces that I heard about what his life is like, where he's working 3 weeks, 90 hours a week, and then doing his other business for 3 weeks. I think that he would agree that not having a lot of complicated stuff going on in your life does make it a lot easier to work a lot of hours, right? So for me right now, my kids are in Florida. I go to see them once a month, and I'm just like fully dedicated to them. For example, I won't be doing my live stream this upcoming weekend because I will be with my children, and I'm very focused on them then. If I had kids and all this other stuff going on in my life, instead of having a more simple existence in this moment, it would be a lot harder to put all this energy toward working and then being able to sleep the way that I want. I would have to be problem solving stuff at home and all this stuff. It would be tough. So having a simpler existence makes it a lot easier to keep doing this. And I do want to say it's only been 3 weeks, but I feel energized and I feel ready to go for the next week right now. I'm even thinking about working a little bit today because I have this trip coming up and I want to try to make sure that I space out and get the hours and all this stuff. All right, Vin has a question. Greetings, Marc. I wanted to ask this question a couple weeks ago, but you were shutting down for the final 5 minutes. How has it been as a poker dealer during tax season when you go to file taxes? So that is a great question. And unfortunately, I won't have that answer until next year. See, for me, I have always worked in poker rooms just coincidentally where they take the tips and they go on your check and the taxes get taken out. And so I have never been in this situation where I get tipped and walk with cash and then have to handle that. And I've actually been getting this question a lot. I've tried asking some dealers who are more experienced with this what they do, but I don't want to give any advice here for something like that because none of these dealers, like, they're all smart people, but they didn't strike me as people who were dead on educated the way that somebody would have to be in order to give the right answer for this. So I don't actually know, and I'm in a little bit of a unique situation when it comes to taxes for myself because I have a business that I have losses in from 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, and this year. And so it's like there was a whole bunch of expense. We didn't make any money with the business. I own like 80% of it, and so I'll be able to write off a lot this year because you can go back a combined 3 years for business losses if you don't use them up, and I haven't used them up. So that's a little bit too much detail, but I think you get the idea that for me, I don't necessarily fall into this category, but I am going to try to figure all this stuff out. Tony says, "Hi Marc, not to fangirl, but I'm excited to be able to finally get on the live stream. It's really good to see you. I did get your email recently. I'm pretty sure I responded to it in this moment. I have mild panic that I forgot to, like I might have wrote it out and then forgot to hit send, but happy to have you here, and I'm still not sure how to handle these types of moments, so you can learn with me, but definitely appreciate you jumping in the chat saying hey, and feel free to ask any questions that you want. If I remember, you're up in Massachusetts, and I'm excited for you to get your first dealing job. I have it up behind me here. If you wanted to come out to Houston and get a little bit of experience at this event, you would probably be able to. They're looking to get about 10 dealers. I think he said 11. I put 10 here just because I assume he's gotten one by now. But they need like 50 something total for this thing, so they need 10 more dealers for this particular event in Houston. Is going to be huge. But I'm just throwing it out there because you had mentioned that you're looking to get in and get your hands dirty and all that stuff, and super happy to see you here. Gigi says IRS has a program you can sign up for, taxes taken automatically from paycheck with guarantee not to get audited. However, I imagine that there's more. That's really good to know, actually. And one of the huge benefits of having this live stream and having this channel is, I say this all the time, people that watch this educate me constantly, and I love that, and educate each other constantly, and I love that. Gigi says, I experienced what they called an adjustment, and I owed $650. Massachusetts here also. Oh, interesting. Let's see. Tony says, I'm at work right now, so I'm not sure how much I'll be able to watch. How much I'll be able to watch live, but I wanted to see if I could throw out a few questions if I'm able to. Absolutely. Gustavo, welcome to support True Poker Dealer. Thank you for the support. Appreciate the membership very much. If I remember correctly, you're a returning member, and so appreciate that too. So talking about what this conversation was like in the break room with myself and another dealer that works long hours. So it was sleep. It was also nutrition. I don't really love the food conversation because food is such a part of culture and religion and all these different things. And when you change your diet, you almost have to change your friends unless you know exactly how to do that. For me, I've been eating mostly plant-based since like 2007. I'm not 100%. You'll see me eating chicken in the break room sometimes when people bring it in and all that stuff. But I will say that having steady plant-based nutrition for me makes it so that I feel more level all the time. It also makes it so that the bathroom's a little bit smoother all the time. And I do have 1 cup of coffee every morning, which I hate. For those of you that know me in my personal life, I do like to blame all my problems on coffee. It's sort of a joke, and it's sort of not. But you know, when I'm working like this, I do give myself a cup of coffee in the morning just to like get myself going and energized and like out the door and everything like that. But having healthier food instead of junkier food, for me, makes a big difference. And we also talked about snacking at work and having a meal when you get home. I've had trouble. So the first 2 weeks of this, I did 5 11-hour shifts, okay? At the end of my shift, I'd go eat dinner. So I would just be having snacks throughout the day. I noticed when I worked 12, 13, and 14 hours that I was hungry. Like, I needed a meal. And I didn't plan for it. I didn't prepare for it. And I didn't bring that food in. So that was something that I was not enjoying about this, was once I got to hour 14, I didn't really want it. Like I told you, Friday I got home at 12:20. No, I left at 12:20, which means I worked until midnight. I tipped out, and then I left after midnight. And you know, when I got home, I had a meal because I was hungry, but I shouldn't have waited that long. I should have been able to have a meal in the break room, and that was definitely something that jammed me up a bit. Gustavo says, "Hey Mark, I like the shirt. You giving a bit of that Miami vibe." I appreciate that. So, you know, for those that watch my live stream, I love wearing the black tee. And I wanted to put this as the background because it gives a little bit of insight into what the casino parties look like. And you can see what this is in the background. And my black shirt just did not go on top of it well. So I was like, I have to throw something on top of this so that people can actually see me properly. And I just chose this shirt. And yes, my wardrobe is much more Miami than it was before I lived there. And I enjoy that very much. I like things that bring energy to me, I guess. And, you know, thank you to Jazz over the years for helping me put this wardrobe together. Some of it's my personality, some of it's hers. I'm pretty sure that she helped me pick this out, if I'm being honest. But I like this very much. And so let's see, what else we got for week 3? Talking in the break room about how to make it last a long time. Yeah, it's sleep. Oh, it's mentality too. So one thing about working long hours, again, 12 to 14 hour shifts by choice, okay? Well, something about this is when you get in, if you have mentally prepared yourself for a day like this, it's much, much easier than ending up getting stuck. So this is sort of how I do it in my head. I get in there, I don't think about how long the day is going to be, but I know what I'm aiming for. Like, you know, if it's 8 a.m. and I'm aiming for 10 p.m., I just sort of have that in my head, and so I get through my first some people call it a rotation, some people call it a string. It's the number of tables you have to deal before you go to break. I get through that, I go to break, and I usually sort of keep myself busy. I'll have some water. I've been bringing kombucha as well. I have no idea if that makes sense or not, but it has a little bit of caffeine because it's tea, and I just sort of like it. Like, I chose to bring in 1 kombucha each day for my shift because it makes me happy. And I don't think of it as unhealthy like soda or anything like that. It could have been some type of a like Snapple that has a lot of sugar, but I chose to bring that in for that little bit of burst and literally just as something to look forward to on a break. Having a little something to look forward to on a break for me does make a big difference, where that's what I'm focused on in the morning. And then by the time I've gone through 2 pushes of, 3 to 4 tables, I'm usually feeling relatively energized. I've got my sleep, I've got my caffeine, and I'm hitting this point where, all right, now I've got about 7 hours left in my day. And I'm like, I can work a regular shift is sort of how I look at it. And that's, that's just me. But going into it with that mentality definitely has this value to it for me, where my first 2 pushes, I'm looking forward to kombucha. I'm enjoying dealing the games. I'm sort of chill. I'm relaxed. I'm like sitting in a way where I'm not trying to crank hands out super fast unless it's a table that I know I'll get a lot more money if I can get a couple more hands out. But I'm sort of just relaxed and enjoying being there, you know, and that is something that I should say. I do like poker. You know, it's been a long time for me being around poker. It's been a long time for me being in the casino industry. I had a break of about 5 years where I didn't work in casinos at all. I was just on YouTube and I was doing other stuff as an entrepreneur. But at the end of the day, I do enjoy poker, and that also makes it a bit easier because there are some, especially at Texas Card House, there are some decisions. I don't care what time of day it is. There are some decisions that players have to make that are interesting. And sort of seeing what they do is a very valuable part to my enjoyment at the table, where they're playing these like PLO bomb pots for with 4 or 5K deep. Sometimes it's pro versus player that doesn't know what's going on, and also I'm there sort of messing around and having fun with some of the players that, you know, now that I've been working for 3 weeks. This is a full 3 weeks. It's been about 170 hours combined or 160 hours combined. I'm familiar with a lot of these guys. We've got our little running inside jokes and all this stuff that sort of make it fun as well. And that's something that is a lot easier to do when you've been a dealer for enough time where your habits are good and you've got some extra attention span where you can put your energy towards something else. You can sort of have fun with people. And so there's definitely that. Tony says, last one for today. How likely is it that a prospective employer would be willing to give me an audition even though I do not meet the experience requirements in a job opening post? Okay. It's an excellent question. Now, my answer is going to be, I want to give you some perspective into the industry right now. There's a lot of hiring that's needed for poker dealer jobs. There is not enough experience out there that's willing to work in all cases. So because of that, your chances of getting an audition definitely go up. It still does depend on what's going on in each individual poker room that you're looking to apply at. And as far as I know, Massachusetts is where you're at. Massachusetts and Connecticut might be different than this, but as far as I know, most places don't actually check to like find out if you've worked anywhere. So I'm not in any way telling you to lie about your experience, but if you did, you might get away with it. So I'm sort of implying that it's okay to represent yourself a little bit. But I will tell you this, they're going to know as soon as you walk in that door. Okay, so if you do put down that you have dealt for 3 months or 2 months or 6 months or something like that, they're absolutely going to know it. So the only way that I would put something like that down is probably if you've dealt underground games or something like that. Then they would probably not understand it, but be slightly more okay with it. But honestly, I think if you apply to these poker rooms and say that you have learned to deal and you believe that you are more than capable of dealing in a casino, stuff like that, I think you should be fine to get an audition. But, you know, honestly, this isn't like, we're taught sort of in college to know the game and hold your cards back, using a poker metaphor, and like play the game super well. When it comes to getting poker dealer jobs in casinos, a lot of the time you can just literally ask the right people, the supervisors, stuff like that. What do they do? And you can literally get an honest answer from them a lot of the time as to what they're willing to hire, what's required, all this other stuff. And so I would sort of recommend, and this is me figuring this out as I go, what would I do in this situation? I would sort of recommend, honestly, just either going to the poker room. I know that you said you live sort of far from some of these. Going to the poker room or calling up the poker room and asking to talk to a supervisor and just being like real honest about it. They're not going to know who you are in the conversation, right? You're just going to be somebody on a phone. But just like really ask the right questions about like who they're looking to hire, how to get an audition, and do communicate confidence that you are good enough to pass an audition, even if that's not true. And also, if you can remind me, have you learned everything about how to deal? Like, how far along are you in your quest to become a dealer? Do you feel like you're ready to deal in a casino? Are your mechanics good? Do you understand the more complicated rules of the game? Have you practiced at all with dealing to live people? these types of things make a big difference. Dealing at an audition it's a pretty intense experience. So if you don't go into that with live experience, it makes it pretty tough. I mean, my first audition was for blackjack, because the original thing that I learned was how to deal table games. I learned poker like 3 months later or less, but it was a blur, right? Like, and I had auditioned in the class. It's a pretty intense experience, honestly. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful to you in terms of that question. There's a lot of hiring that's needed though, and I've been hearing a lot of stories about underqualified dealers getting hired and getting thrown in there, and most of these poker rooms that do it, they don't have the ability to train. By the way, if you are a poker room that has bad dealers that need training, please just reach out to me. We can figure something out. Like, I could go there for 5 days and make a huge difference. I've thought about that too, and I know that I'm in the middle of this 26-week challenge to deal 50 plus hours, but I do still do consulting for stuff like this on the side, and if I need a deposit for a week in order to help a struggling poker room, like, I'm there for you guys. I have heard so many complaints about dealers across the country in different things, and you guys might think that these events that people run, like the WSOP, I heard complaints about the dealers there. Why? Because it's hard to find dealers. And in one audition, somebody might slip through the cracks that appears to be good, and they're actually not good, because at the end of the day, the amount of time that you get to audition somebody is very limited, and you have to make a decision on them. And so they might still need training. It happens all the time. So just sort of mentioning all that. But Tony, I think right now is your best opportunity to get a dealing job, and I really think just sticking to it and taking advantage of this like sort of awkward COVID time where a lot of people don't end up wanting to work. I think just go for it. You said I'm not ready yet, but I've been moving along the course pretty well. I'm able to actually deal a home game and run it smoothly though. That's really valuable. And I mean, you could even talk to them. So depending on how bad they need dealers, you could literally be honest about that over the phone with the supervisor and say like, hey, I have dealt a home game recently a few times and run it smoothly. Like, I'm good enough for that. I'm still learning some of this stuff. You know, you can say I'm learning on Truepokerdealer or whatever it is that you want to communicate to them. But that's good, and I think if you keep at it with that type of attitude, plus the way you wrote your email was very detail oriented, which is valuable when you're trying to work in a casino poker room. So I think just stick with it, and you'll be able to get what you need. And do keep in mind, the first audition that you have at a poker room does leave an impression on them, but it doesn't mean if you don't get the job, you can't ever get the job. So if you go into your audition, let's say that you do get an audition and you don't pass it, your attitude during the audition, their ability to believe that you will get better is a very important piece to this puzzle. So for example, when I audition somebody, if they're trying to hide their mistakes, I don't like that, okay? I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to stare right into the camera and say this. The person who's auditioning you is going to know when you make mistakes. You're not going to be able to hide them. You're not going to be able to avoid them noticing. So you have to own it, okay? Don't stop everything and own it, but don't worry about it either. It's not like an acting audition where you sort of have to be perfect throughout the whole thing. A poker dealing audition is, does it feel like poker? And do they know how to call the floor? And does it feel like poker? If you make a couple of mistakes here or there, if you correct it properly, or if you call a floor to correct it properly, which is also correcting it properly if that's a situation that's required, that goes a long way in terms of their confidence with you. And if in your audition you say to them, yeah, I know I messed this up, and I know I messed this up, and I'm still working on this, I'm still getting better, and you know, like if you just talk to them honestly about that, or if you accidentally make a mistake and then you say, oh, my bad, let me fix this, or whatever is appropriate, right? Acknowledging mistakes is actually a valuable thing, and showing that you want to grow. I do fear that I just communicated that a little bit poorly, because you don't want to, if you think you made a mistake but you didn't actually make a mistake, you don't want to call attention to that and stop the game. Remember, it needs to feel like poker first. You're not dealing, at home with pretend chips anymore. When you're in an audition, You need to get that mentality like every single dollar on this table is real. You're not talking to an auditioner. There's only poker players at the table. A lot of people have a difficult time with that fantasy or that created a implied situation. So you can't sort of be talking to them like that. I just made it sound like you can. It has to be an audition, but like at the end of the audition or something like that, you can call attention to mistakes. And this is what I'm trying to say. Here it is, okay? If you make a mistake and it has an impact in the game of poker, and it's something that would need to be corrected in a real live game, that needs to be handled, okay? It needs to be handled properly. That's what I'm trying to say. If you forgot to take the rake on the flop, but you get it by the river, don't worry about that. That doesn't count as a mistake. You got it, okay? At the end of the audition, you might say, I know I'm supposed to take the rake on every street, and I still got it by the end of the hand, you know? Something like that's fine. But if you give somebody the wrong change, that needs to be corrected, and you can't just ignore that stuff. That's important, okay? That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you for these questions, by the way. This makes it a much more enjoyable experience. So let's see what else we got. In terms of lasting for long hours in a given day, right? Again, this past week was week 3 of 26, trying to work 50 plus hours a week. I did 12, 13, and 14-hour days, 4 days a week. I made it to about 53 and a half hours, okay? I put down a note that is so true. During your breaks, you have to take real breaks if you're doing this. Sometimes the break room can be sort of a rough place where you sit down there and people just start chatting with you, and you might decide you want to have these conversations, and you know, maybe you want to like walk around the room or do all this other stuff or figure stuff out on your phone or like make some important phone calls and stuff like that. Like, you have to make sure that you're taking real breaks that are peaceful for yourself, and you're recharging your battery on your break time. If you're not, you're gonna burn out, and that's a really important piece there. So that's something that I'm glad I remembered to say. Let's see, I got more comments here. Jacob says, started my biggest game yet this Friday. Generally was quarter on the button. Lots of times, 1 to 200 to go. Very happy I picked it up. That's awesome. Dealing big games is interesting. When you first start out dealing high stakes games in poker or casinos, table games, for example, you like really feel the money, and then eventually you just don't feel it at all. The only times that recently, the only times that I've sort of felt the money was when the players had incredibly high expectations of me as a dealer because they were playing with such large amounts of money. And that, to me, that hasn't really happened in Texas. I remember the first few days that I was dealing at Texas Card House, I hadn't dealt in 5 years. And when I went to go deal the 2-5 games, my habits weren't quite there yet. So my speed wasn't quite there yet. And my awareness of all the little nuanced rules weren't quite there yet. And so I did feel the pressure a little bit, like they had this vibe, like, you know, this dealer is giving off this vibe like he might make some mistakes. Then after a few days, that was all gone and everything was comfortable. And now I'm friendly with a lot of the players at the table. And then they get to know me, and then they support me instead of question, and all that stuff is flipped over. And the 2-5 and the 5-10 games in Texas Card House play very big. We talk about it. They're like, you know, a lot of players at the table are 2 to 7 or 8K deep. That's a lot of money on the table, and you know, a lot of the pre-flop raises are 160, stuff like that. So that is to a degree a big game, but it's, you know, it's nothing like when I was dealing in Hollywood in Florida at the Hard Rock, and there were the like 400, 800 mixed games with Robert Mizrachi's group and some of these guys that are really like, I'm not saying he's bad, he was really nice, but there's some of the guys that were playing the game that just everything had to be perfect 100% of the time, and if they didn't feel like it was going to be perfect, whether or not it was going to be perfect, like they're going to start giving you a hard time, and boy does that help the dealer, right? For me, I'm able to handle it, but I can imagine a dealer that goes in there without their own confidence, without enjoying being talked to that way, without thick skin to a degree, receiving the type of feedback that they give, at very aggressive, negative feedback about the job that they're doing, even if they're doing it correctly. because they have such large amounts of money at stake and they care so much about every single detail of the dealing being done, not casino procedurally correctly, but the way that they expect it. And so that is a time that I have felt the money before, to a degree. Tony says, thank you for all the feedback. You're welcome. But my point in saying all that is, yeah, I don't really feel the money anymore, but it's fun in the beginning when you first start experiencing that, because back then in the beginning you definitely feel the money. And so I'm glad that you get to experience that, because it is very satisfying shipping pots that are quite large. Also, this is true in a place like Texas. It might not be true in places where the players are more used to it, but the tips can be a lot bigger at those games. It's almost like the large games, a lot of the time you get dollar tipper, even if it's like huge pots. But then occasionally there's someone at the table that tips proportionally to the size of the pot, and you're just like, so it can either be exciting or not exciting, but overall it's probably worth it, and I'm excited for you for that too. Curious if you have any stories about dealing that game. Let's see, what else do I have about this? There were a handful of people this week who sort of chatted me up. Some of them work in the room as dealers. There was one dealer I had a great conversation with. She's a super sweetheart, and we were talking about some of the stuff in the live stream and some of her experiences and what I've talked about. And so, I appreciate those conversations very, very much. Jacob says I was getting nickels pretty regularly. For those that don't know, nickels are red chips, and that's great. Anytime you're getting red chips as a dealer, it is absolutely great. Great feeling, especially when you're getting double nickels and so on. But yeah, I had a great conversation one morning, and this is one of the things that I sort of run into, and I can handle it. It's totally fine. I mentioned you have to really take breaks on your breaks. Well, for me, sometimes people want to chat with me about stuff, and I want to be there for those conversations because they're interesting conversations, but it's at the cost of like taking a break sometimes, and it is a little bit challenging for me. But she was saying how she watched my live stream about an open letter to poker players from poker dealers, talking about some of the nuances. And actually she was telling me, so I've said this a few times, I don't like it, and Mike didn't like it either, when a player tips by putting the chip on the cards. Now, she said that she's been dealing for a long time. A lot of it's been underground. And she said that she's got her whole system for that, and so she doesn't mind it. And I actually said I'd like to see your system sometime, and I totally forgot to watch her deal. But I'll just watch her deal at some point to see what she does when someone tips her on the cards, because it happens a lot. And I want to see her system, because for me, it just slows me down that little bit. But, I'm always learning and growing, and if a player tips on their cards, yes, those go to two different places, but I should have a sort of way to handle it that looks cool and is quick enough in order to be able to handle it. Sounds like she does. So I appreciated her sharing that, and I'll have to watch what she does sometime and possibly pick that habit up and learn it. Listen, I've got my opinions on everything, but I am always learning and growing and open to new, improved methods for doing what I do well and being able to handle new situations. Over time, from my experience, dealing has become slightly more complicated than it used to be. It's interesting. There's more stuff to do now. The job definitely has gotten a little bit more added to it, and a little bit more added to it, and a little bit more added to it as the years have gone by. And there's more little details of stuff to learn, which is sort of why this channel's here too. But there's more pressure on dealers to do a lot of stuff all at once, and multitasking is tougher and all this stuff than it was years ago. But I think that's also a good thing, because it creates even more of a barrier to entry, so that the people who are better at it, who are more capable of keeping up with it, get rewarded with the money that comes from dealing this job. So there's that. Let's see. Someone named 10 years ago. Is it hard to be a dealer? Croupier, which is the UK version of that, I think. Is it hard to be that position, and do you get promoted in casinos, or does your salary increase based on how experienced you are, how long you have been a dealer croupier? So the base pay for a dealer in most poker rooms in the U.S., and I unfortunately have to sort of stick to speaking about the U.S. here. In the U.S., your base pay is going to usually just be whatever the casino pays. Occasionally, I've heard stories about dealers at rooms who've been there for a long time who have gotten little raises and worked their way up from, like, maybe it's a $5 starting base pay up to 9, 10 or so, where when they come in, they're getting that for a base pay. So that is sort of possible. But really, the majority of your money in the U.S. comes from tips. And the way that works is the better you are at the job, generally speaking, the more hands you get out. If you deal faster, you get more hands out. Well, because you get tipped, theoretically you get tipped every hand, that's going to make you more money. And also, if you are more likable and more experienced as a result of that, and you've taught yourself how to be more likable or taught yourself how to get tipped more, you're going to make more money. So the answer is yes, but it's not like in traditional industries where the money that you get from experience goes up over time just because you work there longer and you're more experienced sort of at the job and the company is paying you more. As a poker dealer, you are essentially your own business, and it's a really good way to think about this job. When you're sitting at that table, you're making money based on the tips for you sitting at that table. So the way that you carry yourself, to the degree that you're able to be unique, is going to result in you getting a different amount of money than somebody else. This is why I say the best thing that you can do to make as much money as possible as a poker dealer is to be a pretty girl, right? It just is what it is there. And the way that you interact with players, like before you sit down, after you sit down, you can still make plenty of money as a guy though. The way that you interact with players all throughout your interaction opportunities with them determines how much money you make. There is a guy that I used to work with who was a dealer at Coconut Creek in South Florida, a Seminole property. He used to do really well because he had a very specific type of charisma that translated really well to poker players, that they just liked him. And he was good at what he did, meaning he was able to deal the job well. People who have that type of charisma, I have charisma to a degree. It's not that type of charisma. He did really, really well, and he earned it because he just put all this energy toward that part of his personality. And honestly, that was him. He was channeling his real self when it came to that charisma, which is really good. There's just this opportunity as a dealer to develop yourself, but it's challenging because there's no textbook on it, right? So you have to sort of figure it out yourself. And I do try to help with that. I do talk about tips in my course. I do talk about how to get more tips in my course. I don't focus on it too much because most of the people that are taking my course are learning, but we do have conversation about that in there. But yeah, the salary doesn't really go up that much. There are also a lot of poker rooms out there where your base pay just stays your base pay, year after year after year after year, and doesn't go up at all. Because when it's $5 an hour, if you give somebody a 3% raise, it's $5.15 the next year, right? Like, I mean, yeah, you can find that. It's just it's not really that big of a focus, I guess. Vin says, Mark, what is your feedback on me being a chip runner? I'm strongly considering taking on that job while I take the Mizrachi Poker Dealer course to familiarize myself within that world while I study. I absolutely say to do it. I interviewed a chip runner recently at Texas Card House in order to give people who are in your situation this following perspective. The name of this live stream, you can go find it on my channel. It's called The Easy Road to Becoming a Poker Dealer. Why? Because you get your foot in the door, and every single day that you go in and you work that job, you're essentially being interviewed. Like, they're not going to tell you that. You're probably not going to think about it that way. But you're getting to know the people that work at this poker room. You're getting interactions with the supervisors. If you take the job seriously, you work hard, and you're likable, they're probably going to spend little bits of time here and there training you. If you're learning the deal on your own outside of the job, such as going to like the Mizrachi school in South Florida, I absolutely recommend getting your foot in the door as a chip runner, and you'll be a dealer at some point within the next probably 12 months max or less. Again, it does depend on the poker room that you work at, because I can't guarantee that every single poker room is going to use the same flow that I'm used to when it comes to having chip runners eventually becoming dealers. Also, one thing that's important to know about that, if you do become a chip runner, which again I do recommend as a step on the path toward becoming a dealer, do not complain constantly about when am I going to be a dealer. That's the number one most annoying thing to supervisors and hiring managers that hire chip runners. You do need to keep in mind that the job that you are being hired for is chip runner, and that is their expectation of you. They're not going to promise you to be a dealer. You have to earn it. You have to be patient. You can bring it up sometimes, but I advise you to do it in a positive way that is not complaining, and I advise you to understand that they hired you for this position, the chip runner, intentionally so that you could be a chip runner. Okay, and that's what they expect you to do while you're there. But also something that's cool about being a chip runner is if they're short on dealers or they need to open a table or something like that, sometimes they'll just throw you in, especially if you have those skills. So you can go to them after you get that job. You can tell them, hey, I've been learning how to deal. I'm pretty good. I'm probably good enough to audition at this point. Maybe not, but if you need me to open a table, like, I'm there for it. Stuff like that is definitely done in poker rooms, and it's pretty valuable. Having people who can do the chip runner job, who can also be thrown in the box to open a table until a dealer shows up or something like that. Because, you know, at the end of the day, poker room is in the business of opening tables. That's how they make their money. The more games that are open, the more money the poker room's making. So having a chip runner there that can get a game open before it otherwise would be able to be open is very valuable. Also, sometimes there might be a dealer that needs to be tapped out. You know, maybe they're dealing a 2-4 limit game or a 1-2 limit game if you're in South Florida, or a 1-2 no limit or something like that. And the supervisor might have no other option but to have somebody like you tap them out. I talked at the beginning of this live stream about, you know, I needed to use a restroom one of the days this week, and I didn't end up needing to get tapped out, but like stuff like that happens sometimes. So hopefully that was helpful to you. Is there a shortage of chip runners right now? I just want to see what the current market is, and I hope the position isn't too competitive right now. I mean, in general, there's a ton of turnover in that position. There's a lot of turnover in casinos, period. Poker dealers have a ton of turnover, period. Chip runners have turnover as well. It just literally depends on the individual poker room at any given time. I would be shocked if you had a very difficult time getting a chip runner position over the next 6 months. Trying to get one in the next 2 months, that's a little bit hard to tell. That just depends on sort of the timing of everything in different rooms. If you're in South Florida, just pop your head into different rooms and sort of say hi and check it out. Sometimes they combine the position of chip runner with what they call down there as a brush, which is the person who signs people up for games. Just, you know, sort of check it out, talk to the different people in the poker rooms, and, you know, also keep in mind, if you show up at a poker room during day shift, they're going to be usually a little bit more like square, and they're going to give you answers that are more guarded and serious. If you show up in the evening, you might not get to talk to the hiring people, but they're going to give you more honest answers that are more laid back, because in the casino industry in general, the corporate people are not there in the evenings. And so the night shift is not really monitored as much, so they can usually do things that are a little bit more intelligent and a little bit less rule strict, if that makes sense. And so you just get a different vibe from them sometimes. And it really does depend who you talk to a lot of the time. James says, thank you for everything you do to help us learn properly. What style and brands of cards should be used for practicing pitching cards? Chem, Copag. What do casino rooms use, bridge or poker sized? Chem and Copag are both totally acceptable. I just tell people to get Copags because you can get them on Amazon. A setup, which is 2 decks of different colors, comes for like $16. That includes shipping. Chems are acceptable too. Honestly, any plastic cards are going to be fine. I like Copags because I find that the Copags that I get from Amazon last longer than anything else. Also keep in mind that casino vendors generally do not sell cards to anybody but casinos because they're looking to only deal business where there's large volume, where they can make money. Selling 1 pack at a time or 1 setup at a time doesn't really do much for them. So that's why I sort of recommend just getting Copags off of Amazon. They'll last, they'll do everything you want. And what do casino rooms use, bridge or poker? They use both. It just depends on the poker room. I have worked in, 1, 2, 3, 4 rooms. 3 of them use bridge, 1 of them use poker. And actually, I've worked at two different Seminole rooms, Coconut Creek and Hollywood, Hard Rock in Florida. The Hard Rock used bridge, the Seminole Coconut Creek used poker sized. And so it's just, it sort of is what it is. They're both totally fine. It's weird that bridge cards would be used in poker when there's something called poker cards, but that's just what happened. And I don't know exactly the origin of these names. I can sort of guess, but I would just be making stuff up. Vin said, oh, right, you already asked that question, and I guess I skipped James before, so I was back to that. But yeah, going back to the chip runner job, I do recommend it, and I do recommend that you watch the interview that I had with Alex, who is a chip runner at Texas Card House Dallas, and it's a really good video that will give you a lot of insight into what it's like being at that job, and it's just a very chill way of going through and learning the stuff that you're trying to get insight into. So again, that video is called The Easy Road to Being a Poker Dealer, or something like that, interviewing a chip runner. You'll see it when you look for it. Let's see. All right, so something else that came up during this week 3 for me, there's a lot of conversation between dealers that I've heard where dealers prefer, this is sort of weird but true, this is just me being honest, dealers generally prefer following a worse dealer than a good dealer, because the perception, and I haven't ever measured this, but the perception is if you follow a worse dealer and you're a good dealer, you will make more money in tips because the table will just have gone from not as good of an experience to a better experience. And I feel like I do notice that I make more money when I follow a worse dealer, but I don't know for sure. But it's an interesting little dialogue. Following weaker dealers, it does seem to give this vibe to the players. And I mentioned this last week. Something that I've been doing at the end of each down is I've been sort of saying, okay, everybody, my time here is done. Appreciate you guys. You got your next dealer coming in, and maybe I'll say their name or something like that. And when I do that little rundown, it cues people to realize this dealer is going to be leaving. And what I find is if I've been following a weaker dealer and they appreciate my dealing, or if they just appreciate it in general, people will toss me a few extra bucks here and there, which, by the way, if you're a player that does that, it really hits home. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That type of appreciation is really meaningful to me, at least, is what I'll say. But I noticed that maybe in Texas specifically, when I have a 30-minute stint where they have a good experience, the flow of the game is the way that they want it, they feel like they're playing poker and possibly having fun, they sometimes will throw me money at the end of the down too, in addition to the tips that they give throughout the hand, which is a nice little vibe. Vin says, what kind of shoes, we're talking top of the line, long-term comfort, do you recommend people get to wear to endure the rigors and stresses of casino life, whether as a runner, dealer, or brush? Well, as a dealer, you're sitting down, so you don't have to worry about that. As a runner or a brush or a supervisor, and this is something I've had to deal with, I personally like. So first of all, I'll say this: if your poker room allows you to wear black sneakers, go for it, because then you're going to be as comfortable as possible. And there are a lot of poker rooms that do allow you to wear black sneakers. If your poker room doesn't allow you to wear black sneakers, then you might have to wear dress shoes, especially as a supervisor. If they require you to wear dress shoes, this has always sort of been a struggle for me. I feel like I've been able to last the longest in echoes for me, where I just sort of pick them up at the mall, I try them on, I make sure that the padding's there, and I'll get Dr. Scholl's or something like that and put them in there. But this is I like the way that you're approaching this question, because your shoes will have a very significant impact on your experience. And so it does make sense to spend the money. But I also should be very honest about this. It's been 5 years or so since I even thought about this, because the last time I was a supervisor where I was on my feet that much was 2016. So, and then back then I was wearing Echoes. I would say this is like a question for the internet at this point, and I would ask, I would find out what shoes you can get that will last the longest, and like Amazon should be able to help you. Although I don't know how much they do stuff with shoes, but find a company that has reviews or money back guarantee or something like that, and just go get it. And Dr. Scholl's and all that stuff has helped me, and I've had those conversations. Is there anybody in the chat right now that has a good answer for this, by the way, for what shoes that you can be on your feet for like 10 hours a day? Because as a chip runner, you absolutely are walking a lot. Like if you're recording your steps with like a Fitbit or something, as a chip runner, you're gonna be like, damn, it's gonna be a good number of steps for the day. I've never worn something that calculated my steps while I've been supervising, so I don't actually know how many steps I get in a given day. But it's an interesting question now that you brought this up. Going back to just finish up the following weaker dealers. What's the thing I want to say? So somebody was talking to me about the dealers at Texas Card House. They were telling me that there's a new room that's opening up near like 45 miles away from Texas Card House. And David says, howdy, how's it going? There's a new room opening up like 45 minutes from Texas Card House. And they were saying that the dealers at Texas Card House, some of them would not pass the audition of the person who trained this person who had learned to be a dealer. And this happened on Thursday, and I had this conversation. And the thing that I sort of communicated, actually I'm not 100% sure I said this out loud because I was dealing and there might have been stuff going on, but first of all, don't rate a poker room in your head based on their worst dealers. Sort of take an average of them, because there's no such thing, literally no such thing, as a poker room with only excellent dealers. It doesn't exist, to my knowledge. I have never come across it. There's always weak links. There's always people who aren't quite as good as the rest of the dealers. I sort of wanted to talk about that, but my point in saying this is, because there are so many dealers and there's no simple way that's built in for a regular training at that job, there's always going to be weaker dealers and stronger dealers, and because of that, there's always going to be a dynamic of who do you follow in any given day. By the way, don't put pressure on your supervisors to follow weaker dealers. That will get them to hate you. Okay, there was a dealer at a room recently that was telling me that there was somebody there that was insisting that they don't follow the strongest dealer in the room anymore because it affects their tips. And my mind was blown. I was like, this dealer that's complaining about that needs to be disciplined. It is not okay for them to put pressure on the supervisors or anybody to choose who they follow, like who do they think they are type of thing. But there are always going to be differences between the quality of some of the dealers in any poker room. As the player, if you believe that a dealer is below that threshold, you're in a weird spot. I still don't know exactly how to handle that, honestly. Because if you have a dealer that just is ruining the game, on the one hand, you just don't want that to continue, especially if you play there a decent amount. You want your poker room to have dealers that are all good enough, right? And if this dealer is just below that threshold, what do? Do you have confidence that the staff is going to do anything about it? Do they have the ability to monitor it? It's really hard to monitor dealers. I honestly don't have a good answer to that. I think that this is one of the problems with the existing supervisor training that goes on in poker rooms across the country. There's just not good supervisor training that's given. A lot of people just get thrown in and they just use their own life experience to make decisions on how the job should be done. And then that really means that you just need quality people, and that affects the job a lot. So my point in saying all this is there are always going to be weaker and stronger dealers, and do your best to be one of the stronger ones, because it potentially could impact your tips on the times that you get to follow a weaker dealer. Just something I noticed. It felt like I was getting more money when I was following a weaker dealer. I don't know for sure. Gigi says dress shoes, Johnson and Murphy, hiking sneakers. Cool. That is something that I will hopefully remember, and anyone that's looking to get those shoes, like Vin, check them out. Let's see what else we got. Okay, I had an interesting moment. So I talked about my Monday morning. Now I'll talk about Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning, I started at 8 a.m. It's pretty early. Okay, fought traffic to get there again. Sit down at my first 1-2 no limit table. There were 4 carryover games going, which for those that don't know, dealing a morning shift, if you get carryover games, a lot of the time the tips on those carryover games are going to be better than average because a lot of the people who have lost have been going home. The people who are winning with large stacks are the ones that are there and they're feeling good. A lot of the time there had been drinking going on, all this stuff. So that was pretty cool to start with. And I sit down at the table, and there's a former Texas card house dealer who deals somewhere else now, who was enjoying his morning or evening. I don't know how long he had been there for. And as soon as I sat down, he says, "Up, YouTube dealer in the house. We're going to try to trip him up." And I'm like, oh, it's 8 a.m., dog. Like, it's so morning. I mean, it's so early. I didn't actually say that to him. I just looked at him like, okay. So that was a really interesting morning. Now, when a poker player challenges you as a dealer in any way, okay, there is an opportunity there. So I was tired. I wasn't really like, yay, this, but I was also aware that if I can come across as likable throughout this whole thing, I'm going to get tipped well. Like, you just know that in that situation, absolutely, in that moment. So I sit down at the table, and he was sort of saying he was going to try to trip me up. Now, the first thing that happened was, I forget exactly what it was. There was a little detail. Maybe I have a note on it. No, I didn't. It's really tough for me to take notes while I'm doing all this because I'm dealing. I can't use my phone. I don't have any pen and paper. I don't have the ability to stop what I'm doing and write down what's happening at the tables. It's a bit of a bummer like that, honestly. I wish that I had a way to properly take notes while I'm dealing. But he was being pretty funny about it, honestly, because first of all, he learned how to deal a couple of years ago from my content. He was aware of that, and he was appreciative on that side. But he wasn't really being that character in the moment. He was being like, let's give the dealer a hard time guy because he was having fun with it. And so, let me see. There was one time where he yelled out really loud in the room, "Oh, we got him on one thing," because after I brought the river, I had pulled the burn cards out, which is something that I do, and it is something that is told not to do in some poker rooms, and it is actually in the procedures for other poker rooms. But these guys don't know that stuff. They just know the one way that they've learned the first time. And so I pulled the burn cards out, and he's like, "Oh, we got him on one thing." Now, he doesn't yell out to the room what it was that I did. And I said, if you're going to start yelling stuff like this, at least be right. That's totally fine to do. It speeds things up. Everybody's happy with it. And then someone else at the table starts in on me too, like, "Oh yeah, well, if there was a bad beat and you pull the burn cards out and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah." I'm just like, okay. And I say, "I'll tell you what, would you like me to leave them there from now on? I'm happy to do it for you," type of thing, right? And so he ended up throwing me some money at the end of this, saying I was a good sport, because there were a bunch of things like that where he was like blasting me, and he knows my reputation and he knows who I am and all this stuff. And it's a fun little game to play with a player who's sort of coming at me as a dealer like that. And if I can make it funny and get the table to laugh, even if I make a mistake, if I make a mistake and I'm sort of like trying to cover it up or something, it's almost like an audition, right? If I make a mistake and I'm trying to cover it up, that's just going to create an awkward vibe where like I look bad and stupid. You have to own it when you do something wrong. I didn't do anything that was like really wrong in that situation, I don't think. But there were 3 or 4 times where he yelled out that I did, and I kept giving him a hard time about like, "You don't even know what you're talking about. You just making stuff up over there," like all that type of stuff. By the way, when you're a confident dealer, if a player, I actually said this to someone yesterday, if a player is giving you a hard time about something like a rule or something like that, and I have a situation to bring up now, it's fun for me anyway to say, "You guys just keep making stuff up. Like, you like making stuff up." But you got to know what you're talking about if you're going to say stuff like that. Robert said, "I passed my audition in a poker room in Houston, Texas. Congratulations. I've been waiting on a background check for almost a month now. Every time I try to call, I am told the manager is in a meeting. The one time I talked to him, he said HR was dealing with a family emergency. Should I wait it out or try to find a new job?" So I have absolutely no idea what to tell you with that. I will talk it through. I'll talk through that circumstance right now to the best of my ability. So the first thing I'll say is, in Houston, Texas, I don't know anything about the industry there other than the fact that I'm in Dallas right now. My understanding in Houston is there's no license that's needed. There's nothing like that. So I don't know exactly what the room would need a background check for or from. And I don't know why it would take a month. I don't know what company you're talking about. I don't know any of the details that are needed in order for me to be able to intelligently speak about this from a place of truth. So I can only speak about this from a place of speculation. What I would say is, some poker room management hiring processes are terrible. They really are. And if this particular room is one of them, then this doesn't surprise me. I've seen stuff like this even in legitimate casinos, poker rooms. I dealt with this with the Seminoles. I don't mind talking about what the Seminoles hiring process is like if they're willing to have it be this bad. Like, when I first got hired at the Seminoles, and I have a lot of really good things to say about working in Coconut Creek and in the Hard Rock in Hollywood, Florida. But the first time I got a job there, they sent me an offer letter. Everything. It was like, yeah, you got hired as a supervisor here, all this stuff. And then before I finished gaming, I went in, I did my fingerprints, I did my drug test, I did all this stuff. Before I finished gaming, before I got the results back and they told me like a start date, they said, oh, we pulled your position. There's not actually any position available to hire. And then like 3 weeks later, I got another offer letter saying, okay, now we're ready to hire. Do you still want the job, type of thing? And then I had to come back and go through this whole process again. And it was just like, what on earth is going on? Like, what if I had put my 2 weeks in at my other job? This is just sort of what happens sometimes. And the Seminoles are sort of notorious for stuff like this. Their HR is sort of left unchecked. Nobody's really monitoring their performance or any of that type of stuff. And I would imagine in smaller poker rooms, it's a very similar thing. Like if the people that are running this operation are friendly with the owners or something like that, they could probably just do whatever lazy thing they want. They could give you the runaround. They could do all this stuff. Maybe they have been in meetings. Maybe they haven't. So to answer your question, what would I do if I was in that case? I mean, yeah, I would probably start looking elsewhere. But I would still probably want that job if it's a place that you want to work. It just really depends on what it's like there. In today's market, with the amount of there's so many possibilities. Casinos are typically dishonest places, okay, to these types of things. There's a lot of games that do get played. I say typically. Texas Card House Dallas is not like that. I really like that about them. There's a lot of rooms that I've worked in that are not like, or I've been around rather, that are not like this either. But there's some that they give you all this stuff. So, for example, if they are full-on dealers, but they still want you to be a dealer, they're just going to delay it until it's time to bring you in, right? That could be 1 to 3 months. I'm making this up. I'm not saying this is actually what's happening, but places do stuff like this, so I do want you to know that. So, if they said that you have the job and they're waiting on a background check and something like that, you probably have the job, but there's no point in sitting on your hands. Like, this could take a while, and they could give you some weird runaround answer for a long time, and I personally don't like stuff like this. It's not professional of them to not respond to you after telling you that you passed the audition. Unless the room's not open or something like that, then that is what it is. Robert says they did the same thing to me at Palm Beach, KK, which I know what that means. Yeah, this industry is just sort of like this. But I also do want to give them a little bit of leeway and a little bit of slack here for a second, because the people who have to do the hiring in poker rooms are often not dedicated to that. So if you have like a supervisor call out, you might have the hiring manager working the floor 6 days 1 week or 6 days for 2 or 3 weeks in a row and racking up 60 hours. And there's just no time to worry about hiring when that's what you're having to do. And then they have to get a break and get an opportunity to like get off the floor. And if they're the one that everything is bottlenecking with, because I talked to a director of a room that's a friend of mine, and he told me when he first got the job as a director, during COVID, for 3 weeks, he had to work the floor for like 80 hours a week for the first week. 60 hours a week the second and third week. He's the director of the room. He's running the room, but they had so many people out with COVID that he literally just had to be on the floor the whole time. Well, guess what? Hiring's not going to be happening if that's the case. You know, they're going to do their best, but it's just not that simple to follow up with some of the stuff that needs to be followed up with. So I should give them some slack and say, I don't want to create too much paranoia here. It's really hard to tell exactly what's happening there. So, you know, start looking. You don't need to wait, right? There's nothing wrong with looking for another job somewhere else. That way, if something weird is going on, you are just, you know, not losing time and wasting your time. But at the same time, don't give up on it. And it's really hard to know exactly what's going on there. CNF said, "Oh, good. I woke up in time to catch some of the stream live. Appreciate you." AWK said, "At True Poker Dealer, have you dealt at Magic City in South Florida? I've played there. I haven't dealt there. My instructor says that's where she's going to set up my first audition after I graduate." Cool. Robert says, "Where is that?" I assume you're talking about Magic City. That's sometimes called Flagler. It's a dog track that's like, I want to say off of exit 3 ish on 95, and then you got to hit some back streets. So I played there. I haven't been there in a while. Recently I saw that Lexo Poker was on a rant about how they're racist against white people at that poker room, and I just thought that was like, if I were him, I would have taken that down, honestly, because, you know, the so what is what I would say. Like, it's just a super awkward conversation that I watched about that particular room. Here's what I'll say about that room. I've played there a handful of times. The action feels good, but I haven't been there in like 5 years. It's definitely valuable to speak Spanish there. And the owners of that room, or the people that run that room, are incredibly like loyalty based. So it's all about the people there. So if for some reason you have an opportunity to get into that particular room through the school that you're going through, chances are they're going to be more likely to hire you than they would someone from the outside. My experience in that room is they care about their people, and people that are not their people, they're just not that interested in. And so, I mean, but I haven't ever heard a dealer that's worked there say that they don't like it. I mean, I've known some people that have worked there. I've known some people that have left there, but they didn't leave there because they hated it. They left there because like Hialeah opened, or they wanted to go to the Hard Rock, or they moved north, and so they just wanted to deal somewhere else. My personal experiences in that room are actually pretty decent, and I think that you can probably make decent money there as a dealer, is my guess. But being bilingual is a very, very valuable thing there if you speak Spanish as well. And I would say that I only know, like, let me see, there's something like 18 to 20 tables there if I remember properly. I might be wrong about that. I believe that a lot of the... I think they get a decent number of 2-5 games, 1-2. I don't think they have a lot of limit. It's just, you know, it's got its own vibe, that's for sure. Let's see. So CNF says, "I have a question. I was dealing tournament last night. Everyone had at least one card. Small blind, big blind had both of their cards. I dealt second card to under the gun, and it flashed pretty badly." Everyone had at least one card. Okay. Small blind, big blind had both of their cards. I dealt second card to under the gun, and it flashed pretty badly. Small blind, big blind said they didn't see the card, but I could identify it was at least the suit. I asked the guy to expose the card for the table so I could give him another, and the small blind, big blind protested, saying that I had to identify the exact card. The floor came to a decision to call a misdeal instead. All right, so I'm going to wait to answer this until you ask your specific question, because there's a lot that could be talked about here, but I don't know what your exact question is. I hear the situation. I understand, you know, the situation. I understand possibly where the floor was coming from with the decision. I don't know what poker room this was. I forget where you said you work. My apologies to that. Robert, by the way, says, "Thank you for your answer. I'll try contacting them again. Then I'll start auditioning at other places." Yeah, that makes sense. Different Robert says the KK ran a class for 4 weeks, 12 hours a week, and used us to train their hosts. Interesting. CNF says, I was just wondering what the correct resolution of the situation was. So when you're dealing and you clearly flash a card, you don't create any conversation about it. You just say, I need that to flip up. That's it. If people protest, you say, I saw it. You just flip it up. If they say you need to say what the exact card is, you tell them, just flip that card up. And once you get any resistance to anything ever as a poker dealer, instead of handling it yourself at that point, you just call floor. So from your perspective, it goes flash a card, you saw it, you don't explain yourself, you say that card flashed, I need to flip it up. If people say I didn't see it, I didn't want anything, you sort of say it again, see if you can get through that moment. No, that card flashed, I need you to flip it up. And I'm assuming you can't reach it in this case. If the small blind and big blind have an issue with that, you just immediately call floor. One of the most important things about being a dealer is you do not argue with players. You do not go back and forth in moments of resistance with players. You just get the floor. It's totally acceptable for you to have a floor come over and the floor to make a ruling that's outside of what the correct rule is. And if you haven't explained yourself and done all this stuff in this type of a situation, then it's going to be a lot easier for everybody at the table to just stomach whatever situation and decision the floor comes back with, right? So the floor probably came over at this point. It was just like, there's been all this weird conversation about this dynamic. I don't see the need for this hand to go on. We have speculation as to whether or not the dealer flashed the card. I mean, realistically, if there's any chance that a card was flashed, poker players lie. Like, you can't listen to what they say. They say they didn't see it. If there was an opportunity for them to see it, some players are going to say that whether or not they saw it. So you as a dealer, you just expose it. Like, it's just that simple. But once there becomes a back and forth dialogue, yeah, you just get a floor. So hopefully that's a helpful and clear answer to what you're looking at there. And this is the type of thing too where you're not trying to get it right. You're trying to play it safe. You're trying to maintain integrity under all circumstances. So the fact, even if you're wrong and the card didn't actually flash, it doesn't matter. You're not actually hurting anything or anyone. It's all random. You are doing your best to represent the truth there. So, that's the situation. You just tell them, hey, I need that card to flash or to flip over. It's exposed. They fight you on it, all this stuff. You just say, no, that one flashed. Yeah, that's another thing too. There's no real value or benefit to giving an honest answer there. As a dealer, you just say it flashed. If you are going to expose it, you just say it flashed. Oh, what was it? It's like, you don't need to prove yourself. The card flashed. Like, it's not about whether I can see it. So let's see. Hey Mark, I recently purchased How to Deal Texas Hold'em, and my question is, does that expire after a month, or is it a course I keep forever? I appreciate that question. You are paying for 1 month from the day that you purchased it, and so it's a monthly membership on YouTube where you've joined the channel, and after that month you will either renew it or lose access to it. And you can keep it for longer than a month if you'd like, or you can stop after the first month. Hang on one sec, guys. I'll be back in 1 second. You need something?
No, I was wondering if I should first start.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Just, close the door, it's cool. So, let's see. So, what else do I have here? Yeah. Curious Visions, how long ago did you make the purchase? And I've set all my stuff up so that it's recurring monthly. I make it so that you have an opportunity to learn everything in 1 month, which is sort of a long period of time. And I also make it so that, if you do need longer, it's there for you. But if I were to be selling this course with a one-time price, it would be a lot higher than $50 is sort of what I'm saying. Like, Poker Dealer School is $800 to $2,000 depending on where you go. And so I use a price and a setup that makes it a lot simpler, I would say, for people. I'm curious, is anybody... Oh, by the way, one of you said that you're in the Houston area. Hold on. You are waiting for a poker room in Houston. You should consider jumping in the I Host Poker professional casino parties. If you want some experience, like, look at this. I've literally got this up right here. This is Houston, November 11th, and they need 10 dealers, and you get $90 for 3 hours. Like, that's a very simple place for you to go while you're waiting. Visions said, I got it a week ago. That's good. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't bring that up before. I've got this up behind me, and one of the owners of Texas Card House also runs this organization, and I had a conversation with him. His name's Bill. He's a real good guy. He'll do a quick audition with you, and you can do this while you're waiting for sure on November 11th. It's pretty soon. And get some experience and keep yourself flowing. And I by the way, I love that he brought this up to me, because people who learn through True Poker Dealer need places to get practice, and this particular event is going to need a total of like 55 poker dealers alone. So it's a great opportunity to go in and go from zero experience live to some experience live. So if you're in the Houston area, this is something that should be on your calendar, in my opinion. And it won't be a problem with any of the other stuff you got going on. Let's see. All right, what other situations do we have here? Oh yeah, so speaking about when the players think that they know the rules, right? Players telling you in this exposed card, if you don't know the exact card, then they're trying to determine what you're supposed to do as a dealer. This happens all the time. I had a situation come up that was sort of like this, where I had a player who was incredibly tilted at a 1-2 no limit game, and he was sitting in seat number 1. Robert says, "Thanks, I'll check it out." Yeah, you really should. It's like a simple win, So I had a player who was incredibly tilted, and he raised. So he was second to act. First to act under the gun was in seat 9 to my right, raised to 15 in a 1-2 no limit game. Seat 1 to my left, tilted, makes it 100. He's got another 100 behind or so. Everybody folds around, and this guy in seat 1, everybody already knew how tilted he was. He had just lost a big pot. He was pretty frustrated, and he was like saying he's going crazy now type of thing. Okay, so he makes it 100, folds all the way around to the player who had put in the 15 to start with, and the player who made it 100 thought that everyone folded. Sometimes it's hard to see the player in seat number 9 if you're in seat 1. And so he just takes his cards and he slams them face up on the table, showing a king deuce offsuit. Right? He has king deuce offsuit. He just 3-bet to 100, and the player who he's up against, he doesn't even realize still has cards. The king deuce offsuit land face up on the table, clearly identifiable, and they're sort of landed so that they're sort of touching the muck. One of them is like maybe a third of the card is resting face up on the muck. So I look at the player and I'm like, there's still action over here. And he's like, oh, I thought everyone had folded. Like, he's so tilted, he's not even paying attention. That can happen sometimes. And so he ends up grabbing his cards back, and I'm fine with it as a dealer, by the way. Different houses have different sets of rules, but when a player's hands are incredibly identifiable, especially in a situation like this, like, he can just get his cards back. He clearly wasn't folding. Nobody thought he was folding. He was literally announcing, this is what I just raised with. He was not saying like, oh no, I'm going to fold. In that case, it totally makes sense to protect the player. And so the other player at the table saw his hand and he was like, wait, you just exposed your cards? That's what your hand was? He thought that it was another player at the table who had folded face up. And then he's like, I'm all in. And then this other guy calls. So we've got this pot for about $400 pre-flop. The player had king-queen that had originally raised. And obviously he's a huge favorite. And obviously he's excited to get his money in like this. And obviously when he goes all in for more than 200, the other player who had 100 behind is going to call. So this is a $400 pot. After the hand is over and the player with king deuce lost to the player with king queen, after the hand is over, 2 players at the table start telling me that the king deuce should have been dead. And I'm just like, same thing as always. You guys are just making stuff up. And so then they start to explain to me that there was one time where they were at a poker room where somebody ruled that a card that hit the muck is dead. And therefore, this situation, the cards should be dead. So the question that you have to be able to handle, or the question to ask yourself is, how do you handle situations like this where players are adamant that the rule that you just allowed to happen is wrong? What do you do? There's sort of an instinct to want to convince them, okay? Well, for me, the thing that I decided to do was I explained to them that that's not the rule here, and I'm happy to get a floor. It's always important to offer a floor when a player starts saying that something was done incorrectly, okay? If you do not offer a floor, it really feels like you're trying to cover it up. It creates confidence when you offer a floor. So you offer a floor, I offered a floor, they didn't want that. They just wanted to be right? Okay. Then I explained to them, if you'd like, I can talk about this in my next live stream, right? I have the luxury of being able to do that. But the message here is the first way, and I talk about this all the time, the first way that somebody learns the game of poker and the rules of poker is often the way that they picture the entire rule set going, and they have this like strong attachment to it in their head that things are supposed to go that way. So in this case, I offered the floor, they didn't want the floor. I explained to them that it's not commonly done that way. The more intelligent version of the industry allows a hand in that situation to still be live. And I told them that I would talk about it in my live stream, so I did. And I don't have any specific rule sets for this, but I've been a part of so many different poker rulings when it comes to stuff like this. There was one room that I worked at where any card that touched the muck was dead. That same room also made it so that if the cards touched the board cards, it was dead. It was absolutely crazy. We were killing hands left and right. That's just not how poker works. We're not killing hands for stuff like this in poker. The player clearly didn't notice that another player was still in the hand. He clearly put his cards face up. They were clearly 100% identifiable. And there's no scenario in a more professional room where those are going to kill cards, even if they land face up on the muck. So just wanted to sort of talk about that situation. Let me see here. Give me 1 second. This toilet, this thing is broken, man. It's like sometimes you gotta do it again and then it stops running. Yeah. So, let's see. What else do I have on here? Like I was saying, I don't feel that tired. I feel ready for this next week. I am gonna have a little bit of trouble hitting my 50 hours this week because I don't have Friday available to me. I'm going to be traveling. Ashley says, D1 Key says, hey Mark, hey, what's up? Good to see you. Ashley says, what would have happened if those cards were face down and not identifiable? Then they would have been dead. If the player had just thrown his cards down face down into the muck when there was still action, they're completely dead. Then it's going to be up to the floor to determine if the player gets any of their money back or anything like that. There's different rule sets for this. I don't actually know what the rule set would be at Texas Card House in Dallas. If I were the one that had to make that ruling, I would basically force the player to lose his money. Like he mucked his own hand in the middle of a hand after putting money in the pot. The only exception to that would be if the player whose action it was folded or something weird. Well, then he wins. But I guess technically maybe not. These are incredibly one-off situations. So, but the cards would have been dead for sure. Sometimes what happens is you get a nice player at the table, maybe the guy that raised for $15, who will just fold when an honest mistake happened and just sort of move on to the next hand. And if the cards were face down, then they might feel like they were up against something better than King Deuce as well. So like King Queen isn't calling that 3-bet very often anyway. So like that player might have just sort of kept his own integrity and folded and let the other player have the money, and that could have happened. And as a supervisor, you sort of allow that situation to play out and decide what you want to do. But if there was some like hardcore thing where the player called, then or raised, and the other player had already mucked his cards face down, and like they landed in the muck and therefore were not considered identifiable, then they're just SOL. Like they're out of luck. Let's see what else I got. Okay, so this is something that happened to me during this long stretch of dealing hours. I did have some soreness or tiredness or fatigue in my wrist. Or no, not my wrist. It was in my wrist, but it was the pitching motion that was tired. So it's like, I don't know the anatomy of my hand well enough to explain this, but this was the feeling that gave me the fatigue down here. Or this was the motion that gave me the fatigue down here from pitching. So I did actually experience that, and what I did was I just, like, and because you have to deal a lot of 4 and 5 card games at Texas Card House Dallas. So what I did was I literally just softened my pitch. I stopped putting as much force into it, and I sort of let my hand rest a little bit as I was pitching. So I went from, let me grab some cards. I went from like this to like this, where it's just like less. And I don't know how clear that was, and I also don't know where that card just went, but I reduced it. I sort of told myself, this is something I need to focus on now, because I am going to be dealing a lot of hours, and I don't want this to become a problem. So I anticipated that maybe it's going to become a problem, and I just softened my pitch overall. And, you know, believe it or not, you can get a card to go pretty far without a whole lot of energy being put into it. Like, I just got the card to go decently far. I know that was a weird example, but it's true. Like, how far is that going to make it on a table? Far enough is really the answer. So, like, you don't have to pitch to their stacks all the time. If you need to give your wrist a little bit of a break, like, you can just pitch to them, make sure that it gets far enough for them to be able to reach it comfortably, and then you're fine. Let's see what else we got here. So this is a situation that came up where there was some confrontation at one of my tables, and I had to handle this sort of delicately. I had a hand where, let me see. First of all, whenever you deal a long time, there are going to probably be a regular player or 2 or 10 or 20, depending on where you work, that just, you know, they're just negative people. They're constantly giving the dealer a hard time and stuff like that. And there's one at Texas Card House that's sort of like, sometimes he's not like this. Sometimes he's got energy and he's like fun and all this stuff. And other times he's like this, right? So there was a hand where somebody bet 50. Someone goes all in for like 350 in a 1-2 no limit game, and the stacks are pretty deep. Another player calls, they go all in for 255, so they have less than the full amount. And it's back to the player who bet 50 who was trying to decide what to do. And the player who bet 50 was thinking about it, and then he started a dialogue with the player who had gone all in. And first of all, you're not really allowed to do that. So I was monitoring the dialogue to see, because there's 3 players in the hand, a dialogue between players A and B is going to potentially affect the money from player C. So you can't really allow stuff like that as a dealer, or you at least have to put a stop to it. It's almost like you can't go back in time and stop it from having happened, but you can discourage it from happening in the future. And if a player continues to do stuff like that after being told not to, you can indicate to a supervisor that they do stuff like this, and eventually they can end up getting kicked out. And if it's in a tournament and something like this happens, which is just a cash game, but if it's in a tournament, then it can lead to penalties, etc. So in this situation, this player started a little bit of a dialogue, and the player who was all in wasn't really responding to it. They were just sort of going like this or whatever, or like this. Okay, so the player who had asked started asking the questions, he didn't really quite cross that line. Well, then he flipped over one of his cards. And when he flipped over one of his cards, it was a 9 on a 9 high board, and he, like, as soon as he did that, I'm like, whoa, you can't do that. We're 3 ways right here. We're 3-handed. And he's like, what? Like, all of the rest of them have acted. I'm like, turn that over. In a 3-handed pot where you're not heads up, you're not allowed to flip a card over. And he starts telling me that he should be able to do that, and he starts giving me a hard time about it. I say, look, listen, I'm just telling you the rules. That's all that I'm doing. You're not allowed to do that, okay? So, whatever. He starts deciding. Then, after he's flipped the card back over, another player in the hand, the one who had gone all in for less, starts telling the guy who's making a decision, can't you see that this guy's like going like this over and over again? Like, just fold, he's beating you. And I'm just like, you can't do that either. And so this other player who gives me a hard time regularly for no reason at all, starts saying, what, you're not gonna tell this guy to stop shaking his head? This guy should stop shaking his head. How come you're not telling him to stop shaking his head? And I'm literally like exploding in my head with a comedy routine about this. And like, I just, I'm not trying to go there or any of that type of stuff, but I'm picturing like how hilarious would it be if somebody like Brian Regan were to do a comedy stand-up bit on a poker player shaking his head and getting himself in trouble by breaking the rules, shaking his head. Like, he's going both left and right and up and down. Like, oh no, he's this dude shaking his head. Like, that's gotta be, like, of course I'm not gonna say anything to him. But I didn't say anything to this player who gives me a hard time about it either, because it's just not worth it. Like, I was talking with a fellow dealer last night, sort of laughing about this, and it's just like, yeah, it's just not worth it. It's not about being right when you're the poker dealer a lot of the time. It's about what really does make sense in that situation in order to just get to the next moment. And so this player, and these are the ridiculous types of things that players will say to you as the dealer and try to get the table to turn against you in terms of your ability to do this job well. Like telling me I have now isolated 2 of these players for doing things they're not allowed to do, but I left the third one alone and that's not fair. And he's there shaking his head. Like, the ridiculousness of it is almost so fun after the fact. That's something that my dad used to really love, that type of humor where just people would be ridiculous and then you can laugh about it later. But anyway, so in that hand, okay, these 2 things happened, and I made the comment like, look guys, I'm trying to enforce these rules as passively as I can, because it was just the type of table where it doesn't make sense to like get a supervisor over, although I did have to call the floor later because one of these players busted, and then he was on incredible tilt, and then he started going at it with another player later after he lost a $1,400 pot. But the way to enforce these types of rules and these types of games is dependent on the situation a lot of the time. And we had a conversation last week about something like this, actually, and I got the following comment, and I want to read this now, and I want to provide some insight onto this. Okay, this is in relation to how to enforce rules in a room where not everybody always enforces rules. I'm so happy you brought up the conversation about the rules. I work with a hard bet line and hate enforcing it simply because it's so common for players to grab a stack and cut them out to make the call. I always give a warning and remind them that it's a hard bet line, but when they keep doing it, now it's a raise. I even ran into a situation today. Player A pots it, player B repots it all in, only it was announced all of it. I called all in and tossed the all in chip out. Player C calls, but only tried to call the original raise and put a stack of 90 chips out. After he realized, he tried to pull back his bet and fold. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He's an older gentleman, and told him technically it was a call, but since he didn't know it was a pot all in, he could fold, but his chip stack had to stay out on the table. Hard bet line. Floor was called and the stack stayed. He was also given the chance to complete or fold. He completed. Okay, so the context here is like, if there's other dealers that aren't enforcing this properly, that's going to be a headache to do that, to have to be the dealer to do it. And it's interesting too, because in this type of a situation, this is a good situation where you really do want to enforce this rule. And as a poker dealer, you really want to enforce like the rules properly all the time. But in this particular case, he's talking about a hard betting line. Any chips that come across the betting line are in the pot. I hate that rule. I hate it. But if I worked in a poker room that had it, which I probably wouldn't, but if I worked in a poker room that had it, I'm the dealer and I work at that room, and so I have to enforce it in between trying to tell them to stop enforcing that rule. Like talking to the staff, little joke. So in this case, he sort of had to be the bad guy, and he's telling a story about how this older gentleman who truly didn't know that there was an all-in, truly, like, couldn't see the chips, vision maybe not be so good. Sometimes you get players that mentally aren't all there, honestly. I'm not trying to say this player was like that, but it happens, right? And as a dealer, you have to decide. There's a lot of weird decisions you make as a dealer situationally. But this player puts a stack in, and then he has to keep the stack in, and then a supervisor has to come, and the player's probably all pissed off at the dealer, thinking that an injustice has been had, especially if another dealer in the past has not enforced that type of a rule. And so, it is a tough dynamic because it does affect your tips if you don't know how to handle that situation. For me, if I'm in a situation like that, I'm going to enforce that rule for sure. So I do support that decision fully. And I'm also going to do it in a way to the best of my ability where I can remain likable. And that can be difficult to do. And one of the ways to do that is to take the decision out of your hands and say, okay, I'm not going to force this. Let's get a supervisor. That makes it a lot easier. If they say, I don't want a supervisor to come over, well, when you get resistance to anything that you're trying to enforce, it's the same thing I said earlier in this live stream. You just get a floor. So that is definitely a valuable piece to this puzzle. And I appreciate that comment. Let's see. It's someone named Robert. Let's see if it's someone that's actually been in the stream today. No, I don't see them here. But yeah, these are good examples, right? So I've got this situation now. I'm going to ask you the question, going back to my situation where a player exposes one card when two players are all in and they're making a decision whether they should call the largest all-in bet. Player exposes a card. As a dealer, I tell them they're not allowed to do that. Well, they already did it, and the impact of that already exists. So really what happens, I have to make a determination whether or not I think the player is going to continue to do whatever they want, or if I think that they're going to follow the rules the way that I communicate them moving forward, even after I leave the table. And in this case, I do feel like the player got the message. If it's heads up, it's different. It's not about whether or not there's only one decision left. It's about how many players it affects in a given hand. And so I had to go through the whole explanation as quickly as I could, saying in a tournament, this would be a penalty. In a cash game, we don't allow it. However, you've already done it. So I'm telling you the rule. You need to hear this. That's pretty much all I'm doing. Like, I'm not sitting here trying to kill your hand or anything like that. Like, it's your action. Take your action. I just needed to say that because you did it. Then the other player starts in saying, can't you tell you should fold? I tell him, you cannot have conversation like this while there's three players in the hand. By the way, also I notice, and this is a weird dynamic, but there are definitely players, especially in a place like Dallas, where they want the rules enforced, but they do not speak up. Okay, there's a lot of poker rooms where they just want to be able to do whatever they want, but there's poker rooms, like people in the culture of a city has an impact on these types of vibes. In Dallas, the players really do want a clean game run all the time. They do want rules enforced, but they don't say anything because they don't want the confrontation. It's a very non-confrontational place. Texas is like, people are really stubborn, but they're friendly. It's a weird vibe because it has this contradictory nature, but you just got to understand which side of the fence any moment is on. Most of the time, people are going to try to stay passive and friendly. But it was an interesting situation to come up, and it's one of those things too for me where I'm just like, when this player that likes giving me a hard time wasn't even in the hand, and he still just decided like, I want to try to turn the table against him. I mean, if he was somebody who did that regularly, I would handle it differently. Meaning, if he was able to turn the table against me, I would handle him differently. As it is, he ends up making himself look bad a lot, and it sort of is what it is. But these types of players, like, they can be really tough because if you're not as experienced as I am, you don't really know what to do, and you got to sort of learn the hard way. And these are good life lessons too. You learn about how to be a human in this world by dealing with stuff like this as well. A lot of people grow up not really dealing with any confrontation in their lives, and then they go and do a job out in the real world, and they receive confrontation from customers. And by receiving confrontation from customers, it's sort of the first time that they've really received any confrontation, criticism, anything like that. And because a lot of people learn in their own value system and belief system that it's wrong to do stuff like that. You shouldn't do that to other people. And if they do it to you, they're being bad. It creates this like, oh no, and then they start crying and stuff like this. Poker dealers really get affected by this stuff, especially if they haven't experienced it in their life previously. Well, it's good experience, even though it feels bad sometimes. It's actually healthy to be able to experience stuff like this. So You build yourself up to be able to be tougher and handle more things in your life. There's a lot of value to that as being a poker dealer. You can thicken your skin pretty nicely is a good way that's used to phrase it, that's used in the industry a lot. Let's see what else. So the last situation I'll talk about, and then I'll sort of wind it down. So I'll be on probably for another 15 minutes or so. Make sure you ask your questions now for anything that you want. The last situation I'll talk about was really fascinating. Okay, there was a PLO hand where, let me see what happened. Yeah, it was a regular. I was trying to remember if it was a bomb pot or not. It was a regular PLO hand. And one player got it all in against another player on the flop, on the turn. They got it all in on the turn, and Jack 10 was the nuts at that point. And both players had Jack 10 in their hand in PLO, and this was probably like a $2,000 pot by the time it was all said and done, and maybe $1,500, something like that. And the player who went all in first, when the other player called, the player who went all in on the turn, he hadn't shown his hand yet. Okay, the other player who had gone all in had already exposed his hand and tabled it. Okay, so he showed that he had the straight. The river brought a third heart, so it went runner, runner, hearts, and the player who had already exposed his hand was told by the player who had not yet exposed his hand, "You're good." Okay? Then, after about 10 seconds or so, the player who had not yet exposed his hand flipped over his hand, which included a 10-jack in it, for a chop. And it also included 2 hearts for a flush. So, that to me was an absolute slow roll. And it needled the player who ended up losing the pot in a way that was really outside of the etiquette. And so this particular player who had needled the other player at the table by saying "you're good" when they tabled their hand and then showing a better hand, completely crossed the line of etiquette in the poker room. But they did it in a way where there's not a whole lot that can be done in terms of that particular hand. And what I mean by that is, if you say at the showdown, if you say "you're good" and you get the other player to fold, and then you table or if you say "you're good" and you get the other player to like toss his cards in because he's like, he thinks the hand's over and he's going to win the pot or something like that, you can actually have a ruling go against you where you lose the pot. But if the other player's already tabled their hand, they're entitled to whatever portion of the pot they win no matter what. If you table your hand after that, saying "you're good" hasn't gotten that player to do anything, right? They already tabled their hand. There's nothing left for them to do. So the result of this is you're just going to piss them off. And that in itself is not okay. That in itself is an etiquette violation. And the way to handle that as a dealer is sort of weird. Like, if it creates a fight, you call a supervisor. If it doesn't, it's something that should be mentioned to a supervisor after the fact. The irony in the situation, though, is the player that it was done to in this case was somebody who is sort of there's somebody that how do I say this properly? There's somebody who feels like people can't do stuff like this to them. And I think the player did this to them to prove the point that you're not impervious to people doing things to you just because of who you are. It was a really weird, complicated moment. So a few things happened. Number one, the other players at the table told this player that their etiquette was absolutely horrible, which it was. Number two, the player who had this done to them wanted support. It was really interesting. They actually wanted support from me, the dealer, not calling a floor or anything like that. They just wanted to be told that that was really shitty, what was done to them. And I was like, yeah, that was horrible. I'm sorry that had to happen, essentially. And if you're a poker player that does this, the general vibe at a poker table is karma is coming for you. And believe it or not, the very next hand, they had the second nuts and lost to the nuts in a like $1,200 pot, and they lost most of them or some of the money back that they had just won in that hand, which is sort of baffling and crazy how that works out. But I mean, I'm not saying I believe in that stuff, but it did happen that way. And then everybody at the table was incredibly satisfied that this player had just lost the chunk of their stack that they had just won after having poor etiquette. But they didn't lose it to the player that they had just done that to. And so, you know, as a dealer, these situations are pretty delicate, honestly. Like, this is the type of stuff, slow rolling is essentially what this was, but doing it in this like really nasty, like haha way. When you got a player who's doing stuff like this, they can easily, by the way, if you're somebody that does something like this that pisses off the other players in the room, you can easily get yourself kicked out. And I don't believe this player was kicked out for it because the vibe in the room was like okay, or the vibe at the table ended up being okay. The player sort of was given a lesson and by the other players at the table who just kept telling them, like there was one player at the table that is telling them, like, if you ever do that to me, I am taking your cards right out of your hand and mucking them, type of thing, which obviously isn't allowed either, right? But that's the type of anger that something like that creates. But it's also an interesting highlight, okay? The game of poker has rules that are built into it, and it also has social standards and dynamics that are sort of protecting the holes in the rules. So there's not actually a rule in a lot of poker rooms that says that you can't do something like this, which is horrible. It's just being a horrible person to somebody else at the table. It's tricking them into the feeling of winning and then snatching that feeling away from them instead of just handling it with some grace. But there's some rooms that actually have it in their rules that you can't do some stuff like this, and there's some rooms that don't, and they just sort of trust that the players aren't going to do stuff like this to one another. But it does bring up the point that there are a lot of spots in the rules for people to, like, if you're like an alien that walks to a poker table and you learn the rules, you will not realize that this is not allowed, right? It's just social dynamic that keeps you from doing this most of the time in poker rooms. And I always think that it's interesting when social dynamic is the thing that drives people to behave properly instead of actual rules. And there are a few situations like where this stuff can come up. And this is why, like, if this was done in a tournament, the question is, would this be a penalty or not? Maybe. It's not a yes and it's not a no. It's a maybe. It depends on who the floor is, who gets called over, if they get called, or called over, all these things. But I will say this, at the end of the day, poker is, like, running a poker room is a business, and if you have somebody in the room that is creating a negative experience for the people around them to the point where they might not want to come back and play in that room, you do have to sort of take care of that. So, you know, it was an interesting situation. I'm sharing it because this is the stuff that happens, and this is what I'm here to talk to you guys about. I will take any final questions if anybody has anything else. I said 15 minutes. It's been about 8. But, you know, we've been on here for about 2 hours now. I appreciate you guys being here. Reminder that I won't be here next week. I will be with my kids this upcoming Sunday for week 4. So I will be back to recap weeks 4 and 5 together all at once in one session. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for everybody who's a member of the channel who's gotten the course. And, you know, I have this up here, just a reminder to anybody. In Houston, November 11th, they're looking for casino event dealers. It's $90 for 3 hours. And, there was a message that I was supposed to say here. Let me find this. I do want to make sure that I say this. And I appreciate Bill, who has given me all this info. Join our professional team of dealers and grow your knowledge and experience dealing with iHost casino parties. Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like, this is an opportunity for anybody who is not as experienced of a dealer to get some table time. You don't need to be a perfect dealer in order to be able to deal at one of these events. You do still have to pass a much simpler audition than normal. And you know, Bill's a good guy. I do recommend going to do this. there's going to be locations not just in Houston for this as well. So apply even if you're in Texas but not in Houston. Apply if you're trying to learn, if you're trying to get some table time. Reach out, apply. You just literally go to ihostpoker.com, join us in the upper right, and it's really good having, like, there's not a lot of places where you can go before you get hired as your first dealer job where you can get value and provide value to them, get some money for it, get some practice in. It's a good opportunity. I suggest you guys take care of it. Appreciate everybody for being in the chat here. If there's no further questions, I am going to say talk to you guys later. I guess I'll give it one more minute. All right. See you guys. Oh, we got one at the last second. Are there really rooms where bomb pots are allowed? I work in a room where they're really strict on not allowing them, and if the players want it, they have to put the bets out in turn. Yeah, Texas Card House Dallas allows bomb pots the first hand of every table or every dealer. So a dealer sits down. Like, this is what I do. Every single table I deal, if the players want a bomb pot, it's a bomb pot. They do a double board in Texas Card House Dallas. I do know, though, that some jurisdictions, like Florida, for example, it might be harder for the parimutuel rooms that are run by the laws of the state to be able to run bomb pots if that structure doesn't fit what is approved for gaming in that state. So, you know, sometimes the regulations can get in the way of allowing it, and that might be what you ran into. I don't know where you work. Robert says, is there a cheap poker school in South Florida? I'll answer it in a second. Finishing Ashley's, the place that I think bomb pots really got popular from was the Brad Owen vlogs, the poker vlogs. You know, his content has changed the game a bit. It really has. And he kept showing that he was doing some Texas Hold'em bomb pots. I don't know if they were single or double board, and then they started to catch on. People wanted them. They asked for them. Can we do a bomb pot? Can we do a bomb pot? And it just became much more normal in some poker rooms, and that's why poker players are probably asking for them, because they play in one room that allows it, then they go to another one, and they're just like, hey, can we do this? And they try to talk the table into it and all this other stuff. So, yeah, my experience is that a lot of rooms are allowing it, not all of them, and yeah, it's a real thing. PA Parks Casino. Oh, that's where you're at. Yeah. So I don't know the regulations in Pennsylvania. Robert says, is there a cheap poker school in South Florida? So to my knowledge, no. But you can always just get my course, right? My course is literally $49.99 a month. You can get it either at Truepokerdealer.com or through YouTube by joining my channel, and you get access to all the information on how to deal poker. But you know, part of the reason I make it much less money than Poker Dealer School is because I'm not there training you one-on-one. If you want to do an audition with me, you can pay a little bit extra for an hour video session where I'll like watch everything you do and give you that experience. But I'm not there. I'm training you in the sense that you're learning from my videos that train you, but I'm not training you in the sense that I'm watching you and making corrections like they do in a dealer school. It just depends on how you learn. But no, there's nothing too cheap there. Like if you want a cheap dealer school, you could try somewhere like Ohio. They have, let me see, there's a couple places in Ohio that periodically they run dealers training. But I'm going to say thank you very much again. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys next week.